I think that comic book fans, comic book geeks, can be classified into three different groups. Now, I do think that these three groups are the bellwether for what's going to happen to the fandom in general. But I think it's important that we look at these three groups because I really do think that we can slot people into each one of these groups. And the fans who are impacting the economic cycle the most aren't the ones that I think most of you think I'm going to say they are. So the first group I would put is the kind of the normal fans, and it's been the people who, or the original fans, the people who have followed these comic books, these comic book characters for their entire lives. They're the ones who go to the stores. They have pull lists. They follow their favorite characters. Maybe they follow their favorite authors, and it's the ones who you think of normally when you think of a classic comic book geek. Now, the second group I think is as important as the first, but not as important as the last group. And the second group is who I think most of these SJW fans would fall into, and that is the tribalistic fans. Now, the thing about human evolution is that humans are inherently tribalistic. They will split into different groups based on need, based on want, or based on belief. It's evolution, it's just how we do things. Now, you have to remember that comic books have long been the bastion of the outcast. For the vast majority of history, people who liked superheroes, people who liked comic books, they weren't the most popular people. So you have this open forum for outcasts available, and you have a group of people who don't fit in, so to speak, with any other group. So they attach themselves to whatever they can. Now, I think this happens with SJWs in that they pick up kind of a trend, or they pick up a cause, and they'll attach themselves to it, and it becomes very tied to their identity. And it's why they circle the wagon so quickly around anyone who dare kind of challenge anything about what they like or anything about their identity. And that's inherently negative, but that's for a different video. But the big thing about them is that these are the people who they follow it in the periphery, but they're not necessarily reading every single issue. Most of these fans who kind of go around, like, I've been reading Gail Simone's tweets a lot recently because she's just been vehemently anti-Comicsgate. It's just every single day just posting stuff on Twitter about it. It's absurd. It's getting to the point where it's absurd. I don't even think she actually does any real work. But I've been reading those a lot, and you'll see the same people coming around and kind of like they when they defend themselves, they prop each other up, which I always found interesting because they usually don't attack. One person will attack Comicsgate, but then everyone else will prop up that one attacker. So it's not that you have hordes of people attacking Comicsgate. What you'll have is 1, 2, 3, 4 people attacking Comicsgate, and then their kind of peons will come and prop them up. So I always found that fascinating because they say it's because, oh no, we're inherently positive and that's why we prop each other up. That's not really what it is. What it is that they're propping up their leaders to protect their identity. And it's an interesting strategy, and it is effective. It does tend to work because people who from the outside looking in see it, and they just see a lot of positivity behind it, not realizing kind of what's really going on behind the scenes or underneath. But so these fans are they're identitarians essentially at heart, and they're the ones who try to affect the most change because they want to twist it into their image, because that's just, it's to consolidate power. If you've learned anything from any of my videos, it's that the vast majority of this can be solved by just saying it's for power. It's to consolidate power, it's to protect power, or it's to gain more power. It's always one of those. But the group that I think really is affecting the economic marketplace in regard to comics and comic heroes is the I don't want to call them the casual fans, but we'll call them the new fans. And these are fans who have followed the evolution of comic books to its next step. Now, when we look at the history of comic book characters, which I think is where we should focus the fandom. It's not really on comics themselves; it's on the characters. We see that it's gone through evolutions before. We saw that in the 60s and 70s there was this push to try to make live action TV shows about comic books, and that was okay. It didn't really work that well. None of them were super popular. They become cult classics, but it was all right. But the biggest explosion, and what I think brought the most new people to comics, or at least to comic book characters, was the 80s and 90s, where you had this influx of cartoons. Think about it. I think the vast majority of people listening to this, their first exposure to Batman was Batman the Animated Series, or the first exposure to Spider-Man was the Spider-Man cartoon. I forgot what it's called. Web of Spider-Man? I don't know. But their first exposure to these characters were cartoons, which I think is great because it makes it more mainstream. But it's a double-edged sword, because now you have these fans who know it just through the cartoons. They know the lore, albeit just through the cartoons, but they consider themselves fans, and they really do believe they're fans. And so what's the next evolution? What's the next step in this evolution for these comic book characters? It was the movies. If you don't remember, when Raimi's Spider-Man came out, it was such a big deal, because it was like, we are getting a live-action blockbuster movie based on a superhero. It was a really, really big deal. Everybody went out to see that movie. Regardless of if you were a fan of Spider-Man or not, everyone saw that movie. And it did so well that now we have kind of these extended universes for Marvel and DC, and we have live-action superhero movies. I feel like every couple of months a new one comes out. So these are the new fans, and their exposure is cartoons, movies, and video games. And the problem with that is that now, if you were a company, if you were Marvel, and you saw that a huge amount of income is being generated from these movies, and such a small amount of income is being generated from these comics, what do? In a capitalistic society, you cast a wider net. You go with the demographic that's going to make you the most money. And unfortunately, right now, that's the movies. I would actually argue also the games. I think there should be way more AAA superhero video games, because I think that attracts both kind of the regular comic book fan, and you can put, like Arkham Knight or Arkham Asylum did, where you put this deep lore from the comic books and you cross-reference the game with the comic books, so that people can check out these old comic book issues that they might never have read before, and you cross-pollinate that way. But you have these people who their exposure is not the comics. Their exposure to comic book heroes are other forms of media. So I hate to say that comics as they are dying, but they are. But it's not just that they're dying. It's not like they're gonna die and go away forever. It's evolving. It's evolving into these new forms of media. And we saw this with comic books themselves. It was printed on wood pulp, then it was printed on newsprint, then it was printed on kind of like standard magazine pages, then it was printed on glossy pages. So we always had, and then the trade paperbacks, we always had this constant evolution of what comics were going to be, or the medium by which comic book characters would come to us. And now it's just furthering the evolution of it. Now, there are some things with there are drawbacks to this, because at the end of the day, a movie is in production for 2 or 3 years, more if they need to pre-plan it. And comics, you can pump one out. You could pump one out 1-2 a month. So you can definitely tell more stories with comic books, and you can take more risks with comic books. The problem with Marvel movies in general has been that they are very formulaic, to the point where who's going to watch a 4th Doctor Strange movie? Just think about it. In the future, who's going to watch Doctor Strange number 4, you know? If they're all, the movies are kind of exactly the same, just different characters, who's really going to care at a certain point? And also, you're going to have to always get new actors. There's just a lot more hassle with movies that I think you don't have with comic books. And I do like the idea that you could take significant more risks with comic books. You could tell offbeat stories. You could tell stories that you wouldn't normally be able to do with comic books. In fact, comic books were originally really popular because it was basically a movie with no budget. Your budget was the artist or your imagination, essentially. So there are drawbacks to it, but the fact of the matter is that these new fans are what's driving the comic book hero economic marketplace. And that's something that we have to bear in mind going forward. Now, we can talk about the second group all we want, but I at its heart, I don't think... I know that Ethan Van Sciver always says that, this second group, these SJWs, are inherently evil. I don't believe that. I believe that the vast majority... I think they're the ones at the top are. But I believe that the vast majority of kind of the peons are just losers who are very concerned about losing their place in the world. They're worried about losing the one kind of place that they feel at home, which I think is very sad. I think it's extremely sad. And I don't think you should ever tie your identity to just one thing. Because in the end, I've always said I am Venezuelan, but if you were to ask me to describe myself in 5 words, I think Venezuelan might be number 5. It might not even make the list. I'm so many more things than just my race. I'm so many more things than my gender. So many more things than my job. So many more things than just my hobbies. So it needs to be a change in thinking, but it needs to be a change in thinking from them. And unfortunately, I don't think bullying them is going to change it. I think it's just going to reinforce their idea that I need this identity so bad because this is the only place that I'm safe. Which it's really, 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 I'm not going to curse, but it's really messed up thinking. It's really messed up thinking. But I understand that. I understand why kind of that's their first impetus. But when it comes, like I said, when it comes to the comic book evolution, I do think that movies and video games are going to be the future. I think the next generation of comic book superhero fans are going to be derived specifically from the movies, specifically from the video games. And I think comics themselves are going to be less and less important on the global scale of this kind of broader economy. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Is there any saving comics? Because as of right now, I don't think so. I think they're just going to be kind of folded into... I think we're going to get tie-ins, but I think comics as we know them are really going to fall by the wayside, unfortunately. Maybe I'm just blackpilled. Who knows? Here, let me know what you guys think. Like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me at Trajan Channel. I've been active on Twitter this entire time, even though I've kind of cooled down with the videos because I've cooled down with the buying of comics. But let me know what you guys think, and I will catch you guys later.